When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 81. Despite the internal struggle, self-determination led him the way to seek out his own process of success on his own terms. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Dennis Nguyen. Dennis is a data scientist, an entrepreneur by day, and an entrepreneur by night. He works to bring value and consequently happiness to those around him, driven by his mission to help others. He constantly tackles personal gain versus greater good, a fight against his upbringing, and ultimately believes in collaboration, not competition. Dennis is 24 years old, a recent graduate from university for computer engineering and entrepreneurship. As a co-founder of Expressame, he aims to help those seeking employment, especially young adults, articulate themselves to potential employers. Dennis is here to talk about his journey today, navigating expectations, perfection, and what it means to be successful, and how it has, is, and will be impacting him. Well, hello, Dennis. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. So, Dennis, I am really excited for this opportunity to have you on as a guest on the show today. As many people might have already known, is that I interviewed Dennis's co-founder a couple episodes ago. So it's really nice to have a chance to meet another person in this tag team. And Dennis, I really want to say that I'm grateful for your willingness to be here today to tell your story. I continue to feel blessed and honored when I encounter guests like yourself, because it's guests like you who allow me to tap into their vulnerabilities and draw from their strength and insight and inspiration. And getting it to be shared in this space is just really admirable. So it's important we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma. So thank you for being here. All right. So Dennis, in case you're still wondering, this podcast is all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. And this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So today, together, Dennis, my hopeful mission is for both of us to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, I continue bringing forward a trend. It's called the mental beauty rethink. Dennis, okay, tell me what comes to mind when you hear this phrase, the mental beauty rethink.
For me, mental beauty really means being comfortable with yourself and the things around you. I think it's a matter of perspective, and that's how I've always seen mental health, right? Similarly with beauty, just in general, it's always in the eye of its beholder.
Yes.
So everything with mental rethinking is just reshaping your perspective of what defines good and bad mental health.
Right. Absolutely. And, I really like how you started with saying, it's mental beauty is how comfortable you are with yourself and the things around you. We often talk about the perspective that people hold, but it's also important for us to take a look to see what's the perspective that we have as individuals. So, very intriguing insights. Thank you for sharing that, Dennis. Okay, Dennis. So, are you ready to unpack your story?
Absolutely.
Amazing. All right. Well, then let's go for it. So, the first question, Dennis, is give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
So the title for my untold story would be, finding freedom for myself.
Could you say that one more time?
Yep. The title of my headline would be Finding Freedom for Myself.
Finding freedom for myself. Okay. Are you able to share a little bit about what this title means for you?
Yeah. Growing up in an Asian household in Markham, Ontario, my upbringing has been very sheltered, meaning that, I had limits in terms of when I should fall asleep, who I could talk to, what friends I could make, where I could go. And it was very difficult until I was of age and transitioned to university in Kingston, Ontario, where I had a chance of being independent, like actually independent.
Okay. So, finding freedom for myself. So that's where it all begins. From this sheltered growing up in an Asian household and taking steps out into the world, Queen's University. Okay, so I think that we're ready to unpack your story. Let's find out more about what it's all about. Give us that snapshot.
Yeah. So I'm really going to focus on more of my high school period, in particular my final year in grade 12, where I was, in that process of applications, university applications. And the biggest thing was my average dropping a few percentages. And there was definitely an expectation here to perform academically, where because of these drops in applications and the following rejections coming up, my parents and even siblings were really disappointed in me. And it made me really depressed. And so going to university, I was already in a pretty bad mood. And the only glimpse of hope I thought was my independence. But it didn't turn out like what I expected.
Okay. So let me ask you something. So you said that I guess your marks, they dropped a few percent, and that not only were your parents disappointed in you, your siblings were too. Are your siblings older than you or younger than you?
So I have an older brother and I have a younger sister.
Okay.
And my older brother basically got into University of Toronto. I was rejected from Waterloo and Toronto and also McMaster, which ended up being a mistake anyways. And even like reflecting now, actually, my younger sister got to university later than me. She also got into U of T. And so, now suddenly the black sheep because two of my siblings
Right.
got into a prestigious school and my parents didn't think that Queens had enough of a reputation.
I see. And what was it like for you to experience those reactions from your parents and from your two siblings? One being older, one being younger.
It was a lot of pressure. I've always been a high academic achiever. And for them to be like, oh, your GPA dropped like 3%. And suddenly I was not good enough and being called useless or worthless. And hearing that from your closest people really does put you in a bit of a stump.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And then when you got to Queen's University, what was that transition like for you?
It was difficult. I enjoyed the freedom at first because I no longer had curfew. I was able to move around as I wanted to, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I still ended up really staying in my room.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really go socialize. I'm not a partier or a drinker, and I avoid those situations. And so it was lonely. And I think
Right.
dealing with loneliness was one of the bigger issues that I dealt with in my first year. And also, I guess being arrogant because my program ended up being a lot of high school review. So I thought I knew things, but then when I was tested, I was definitely underperforming by a lot.
Right. Okay. I'm curious. You mentioned that, you spent a lot of time in your room, not socializing, keeping to yourself. Was that any different from how you operated when you were at your familial home, feeling sheltered? You did mention that there wasn't really a social aspect. So was it similar for you, or was there still something different about it?
It was similar.
Hmm.
I would, do my work after school and then just go to my room, relax, and call it a day. Early, again, there wasn't really much of a social aspect. I didn't have social media until much later. I only got a phone in grade 10 as well. There really just wasn't a lot of talking to people.
Hmm. And so when you were at home, was that still a decision you were making, or was that more the expectation from your parents?
I think it's expectations because, well, they kind of wanted to monitor everything. So there really wasn't a lot of privacy or a lot of my own decision making.
Hmm. Okay. So feeling like things are being monitored, there's no privacy, not able to make your own decisions, that must have really felt constricted.
Yeah.
So I'm curious then, when you did make the transition to university, what do you think was holding you back to kind of keep the same pattern going when you had that freedom available, when you weren't being monitored in the same way and you did have privacy and you were able to make those decisions for yourself? What do you think was holding you back?
One of the biggest things I would say is I was put in a new environment where I basically knew no one. There were only two people from my high school that also went to Queens, but I didn't really talk to them.
Okay.
And secondly, I think I was also looking for a cultural connection,
Hmm.
whereas Queens is a widely non-Asian community.
Hmm.
For me, it was hard to reach out and make friends.
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't normally go out of my way to make friends in high school or elementary school either.
Hmm.
And all the friends that I did know just weren't around since I grew up.
Right. And it sounds like when you're in such a new environment and there's so much that's unfamiliar, it can get really overwhelming and maybe even too overbearing at times. And it sounds like when you're looking for things that's not available, like that cultural connection and even just the ability to make friends, it's not a strong suit of yours because it was very difficult for you to be able to do that in your confined means at home. So socialization, it sounds like you were impacted by it and it kind of carried forward.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And really when I did have that freedom, it was more like, okay, I'll play some games online and I'll try
Hmm.
to connect with people.
Right.
And really what I was pushing for was like, I guess like finding a space to be vulnerable and kind of distracting myself from my loneliness because
Hmm.
at least there was someone to talk to, even if it wasn't in person.
Right. It was something within your comfort with something that's familiar to you and a risk that you could take that was a calculated risk that you were like, okay, I can do this. I can play an online game. I can meet someone through here and it's a bit virtual and I don't have to have face to face conversation. So you're probably trying to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so tell me, what else is part of the story? I'm sure there are some other elements that we haven't tapped into yet. What are those?
Well, I guess another thing here would be my mindset. Just before going to university and also like the marks dropping, I went through
Mm-hmm.
this really big phase of kind of reflection and
Mm-hmm.
thinking like grades don't matter to me. Like I was really tired of trying to get the highest grade possible and letting that really control my life.
Right.
And I just realized like that wasn't making me happy. And I really went through a thorough discovery of like, okay, what does make me content? Like what is the meaning of life
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
me to be struggling with these things that ultimately don't matter? It's a number that doesn't define me.
Right.
And still recoiling from I guess the final grades or even when I was going through university, I was like, okay, like I thought of it before, like these numbers don't matter, these grades don't matter, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it still hurt, right? To
Right.
kind of be ranked among when you do talk to people, right? Like students always talk about their grades.
Right.
Comparing yourself, having imposter syndrome was really huge. And also just being thrown back to what my family was saying, like, oh, you're worthless or you're useless because of
Right.
these bad grades. And suddenly you're hearing everyone's doing well. You get into the sense like, oh, maybe I don't know things as well as I do. Maybe
Mm.
I am not good enough.
Right.
So it was really hard just, telling myself that it's okay. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can do better.
Right. So even that journey or the process of shifting that mindset was a ton of work on its own. And I'm curious, Dennis, you talked about this whole piece about ultimately still feeling hurt, when discussing final grades from people and comparing yourself and the imposter syndrome. Do you feel that perhaps you might have been self shaming yourself unknowingly as you continued to have these external experiences?
It's very likely just because it's been ingrained in my upbringing that I always have to meet these standards and or these expectations, right?
Hmm.
The blessing here was that they never, controlled what I would do in the future. So for example, like they didn't pick my career path
Hmm.
or the courses that I had to take.
Hmm.
So I think a large part of it was that okay, they had expectations for myself, and I kind of just inherited those expectations unknowingly.
Hmm. Okay. So now I'm curious about something else. You also mentioned that there were certain things that your parents didn't control, like choosing your career path and things like that. Was that confusing for you? Like, how did you decipher what was being controlled and what wasn't being controlled and what was going to be okay to do and not okay? How did you sift through that?
So that one I think was more obvious. My parents don't come from like a formal educational background.
Okay.
They haven't gone really through post secondary or anything like that. And it was a lot of okay, as long as you perform well, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do, right?
Right. So bottom line is perform well. Doing your best is not enough, but you got to be top, top, top. And maybe that's why, because they didn't have the educational background and have those things. So they maybe that's their perception of the only way to be successful is if you're on the absolute top. If you're on the absolute top, there's a guarantee.
Yeah,
Do you think that that's the angle they were coming from?
yeah, absolutely, right? Like my parents kind of raised us, do not do what we did, right? Don't cheat in school, pay attention in class, don't skip out on class, etc., etc.
Right.
That was really just pushed on us to do that, and so we did. But at the end of the day, as long as we were able to show those results, they were happy.
I see. Okay. I get you. That's how it made sense for you. And that's why it was an easier thing to sift through than some of the other areas that were a bit more blurred.
Yeah, the other things was definitely more like you need to ask permission. If I wanted to go out, okay, you need to ask permission. Who's going out with you? What are you doing? Like the full report.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah. So when that happened, did it just deter you from asking or doing? Like, did it just demotivate you to be like, oh, that's just too much work. I don't want to have to deal with this. Or did you feel like
Yeah,
you had to prepare a presentation and a plan and say, okay, these are all the steps, these are all the ways, this is the plan, this is where I'm going, what I'm doing, who's involved, emergency contact. Did you feel like that's what you'd have to do every single time?
Honestly, it wasn't worth the effort for me, so I just
Right.
didn't bother.
Right.
Whereas again, I see like my siblings had a lot more freedom growing up.
And what do you think that was about for them to have more freedom, or your perception for them to have more freedom? What did that look like for you?
Honestly, it was I had to kind of follow in my brother's footsteps because he kind of had a lot of restrictions as well. So like if he didn't do something before I did, and he's 3 years older than me, so like there's a lot of experiences that he kind of missed out on as well. So basically, if he didn't do it, I wasn't allowed to do it, and if he did it, was I interested in doing what he did?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it was no, so I didn't even bother. Versus my sister, who was younger than us, was like, "Oh, she has the street smarts in the family; she can do whatever." So she got to do the things that I wanted to do.
Right.
There is a bit of envy there,
Mm,
but there wasn't anything I can do because time has already passed for me for those opportunities.
sure. And how did you deal with the envy?
I guess I just like with a lot of my emotions, I do just kind of bottle it up. Like I've never really spoken to people about how I feel, and I think that also goes with my upbringing. It was just like don't make a scene or whatever, and also a lot of disbelief that people like because I was kind of like top of the class a lot. There would be a lot of disbelief that I wasn't happy because we're also kids, right? Like if you're at the top of the class, what else could you want, right? Like
Right. So from the outside in, the way people saw it externally is like, oh well, he must be happy. He's got everything.
exactly.
Because they see as the marker is, oh, he's got the top grades.
Yeah. And that also made me very private. So I didn't talk about my life at all. And we were actually encouraged not to mention anything.
Mm-hmm. Encouraged meaning like by your parents?
Yep. Parents, siblings again, like, oh yeah, they just know not to share, which is baffling to me because kind of like we were told to join that competitive mindset. Like you can't help other people because then you lose your competitive edge.
Right. Interesting how the mindset can work and how it can program and position a person's focus. Wow. And so, I mean, if you feel like you were bottling all that stuff up, how did it feel on the inside?
So, you know how people say when you ball things up, like eventually you'll erupt?
Yeah.
That I don't think was the case for me. I put that energy in saying like, okay, you know what? They called me worthless, they called me useless, and I've kind of feel really bad about myself. I kind of put that mindset into a rage. Like I just want to disprove everything that you guys have said about me.
Mm.
And again, this is why it hurt.
You kind of built some sort of internal like ammo to be like, I'm going to show you.
Yeah, that was basically it, right? Like I'll show you, I'll prove it to you that I can
Yes.
be successful.
Right.
The first couple of years in university, it was totally not like that. Like my grades were not doing well, but by that time they were comparing me to my brother again. And my
Mm-hmm.
brother in university, like in his first few years, again, like he didn't do that great, and he's just like, okay, yeah, you know what, a B or a C. Like they started lowering their expectations of my performance. So I was like,
Right.
a B or a C is fine now. And I was just like, okay, why wasn't it like that when I first started?
Right. You were consumed by that pressure though, right? Because it's like you were, in a way, did you feel like you were performing for them?
Well, yeah, right, because I was kind of doing it like, I'll show you
Yes.
that you're wrong. So it was just like there was that still. It wasn't really for me, right? Like for me, it's just like absolutely at that point did not care about grades. My motto kind of here when it comes to school is knowledge is more important than the grade that you get. Your grade does not reflect the knowledge that you know, as
Exactly.
well as how you apply that in the real world. Like so long as you're able to take that knowledge and do something with it,
Right.
it's not useless.
Oh, it's such a healthy way of thinking. And you're already there. You're already in the program. Like you've already gotten in. You're there studying, doing your thing, learning. So as long as you're getting those marks that you mentioned you were getting, that's enough. As long as you're learning, as long as it's making sense to you, as long as you're able to apply it to yourself and the world around you. So that must have been really difficult to continue to like feel. To me, I imagine like that seesaw feel where you're balancing this, I'm going to prove it to you. kind of keeping up with that act for so long, but at the same time knowing that for you grades don't matter as much. That must have been so hard to keep balancing.
Eventually, actually, what happened was, and this goes into like my later years of university. So after the first two, it was a bit rough. I took my third year, and that's when I started learning new content, and my grades drastically improved. And then I realized why. It was because I was passionate about the things that I was taking. I no longer thought it was review. I was learning new material, and like again, when you're passionate about the things that you do, good results typically happen naturally. So I didn't even have to balance anything at that point. It was just like, I like what I'm doing and I'm exceeding in it.
So you found your breakthrough. You found a way to get through and not have to do the balancing act.
Yeah.
Amazing. Are there any other themes? I mean, you did mention like loneliness when you got to university, given your upbringing, the sheltered upbringing, the confined or constricted way that you lived. Did you feel like there was loneliness that was coming up for you when you were living with your parents before university?
Yeah. Actually, again, this is like one of my eureka moments in my last year of school, where for the entire year, I was sitting alone in classrooms. So this might be also like where I chose to sit. Like I sat in the front and center of the classrooms. But also I've heard from other people that, oh, Dennis is kind of intimidating because he's really smart. And also maybe because I don't really express myself. So there was that. And while I was thinking about it, I was just like reflecting on even before high school, like elementary school.
Yeah.
And I was thinking like, I grew up pretty alone and I actually struggle with defining what friends are, even though like you kind of think it'd be really simple. Someone you talk to on a regular basis that you can share personal things with. There's a connection, common interests. But for me, it was always like, who's my best friend or something like that? Who's someone that I rely on? And once I got into, again, like my 12th grade and in classrooms alone, lunch alone, even in when I wasn't alone in lunch, it was kind of a group environment where I kind of think of us as misfits. There was that sense of like, okay, there's no conversation happening. I don't know what to talk about. It was really socially awkward.
So it became socially awkward. And then what was that experience like for you? I mean, I think when you were expressing to me that sitting alone in the front of the classroom, externally, others perceived you to be intimidating. But did you know it at the time, or is this something you learned afterwards?
I think I knew it at the time.
Okay.
It's almost like the idea was incubating. Once you start reflecting on things, it's like I start counting, right? Like you kind of start counting, how often am I sitting alone? How often is it that people, come up to you and start a conversation and things like that?
So it's like you were questioning your worth. Like those instances, did it sort of prompt you to question your own worth?
Yeah, I had I would say like a philosophical moment during my 16s age. It was kind of the mindset like, oh, I'm okay being alone. I don't care what other people think. And then it just 180 by that time. It's different when you don't care about what people think about you and feeling invisible. Yeah, so it's like that silence that I had to deal with.
So you felt invisible.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that feeling of feeling invisible. I can't imagine what that would have been like for you.
It's I don't know the best way to describe this. It was like because I have classroom presence, but outside of the classroom, I'm like a fly on the wall, like just observing people move around me and observing their interactions, trying to understand emotions. I don't know if it feels like you're just not there.
Right. Did you feel like ignored?
A little, but at the same time, I do know like I think it's a common mindset too. You don't talk to anyone unless they reach out to you first. So that's one of the things. And it wasn't like my name's known, but it's not like I was being approached. And I wasn't also doing anything to approach other people.
So you weren't kind of initiating anything that showed that you were going to be approaching anyone. and people might have been intimidated of you, so they weren't approaching you.
Yep, just minding my own business.
Okay. Any other themes that we haven't touched on that's pertinent to the telling of this untold story?
I think the last thing is definitely success.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so once I found the passion, and I actually got an internship first, yeah, like in terms of all my siblings. So suddenly it was just like, oh, he's doing well. He's bringing value back. And, like, that's kind of the moment where I was thinking, like, I kind of told you so, like, I'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, success is finding happiness, right? Like, and,
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about what happiness really is, but at the end of the day, I think it's just being content with what you have. It's not like you're not ambitious anymore. It's
Mm-hmm.
just you're satisfied by the progress that you've made.
Right.
Even if you do compare yourself to others, like at the same point, like you're grounded and that still makes you happy. And then
Right.
training yourself to not be envious is really difficult as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
as a popular saying goes, the only thing that you need to defeat is your previous self.
Right.
Being passionate, getting good grades, and having a job earlier than my siblings, it felt pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, it was just like, okay, I'm more comfortable with myself. I don't feel as pressured
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of like I can plan for the future of, oh, okay, after I graduate, I'll have a job. So like there's
Right.
financial security there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess in my third year, I was like, okay, I've met a friend in university who was also Asian, connected. He introduced me to his friend group and everything, like his extracurriculars.
Right.
I decided to participate, and it was like, okay, I'm actually comfortable talking to people, and I want to talk to people. There was like
Right.
that craving of status or socialization that was finally resolved. And so now I have
Right.
friends, and like that's how I met my co-founder. I met Ethan through a dinner at actually my friend's house. So Ethan was invited, I was there, and then Ethan pitched his idea for this business, and I just said yes because I was interested in what he was doing. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to help people, and I've been mentoring Ethan kind of in my final year as well. So I said yes, and everything has been like smooth sailing since then. And I wouldn't say I'm yet successful, at least in terms of the Express resume being where we want it to be.
It's getting there, though. Let's at least acknowledge that.
Yeah, for sure. We're making progress. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like that, I'm content with what I have now and where I am now.
Yes. That is such a wonderful way of putting it. Just letting yourself be present. Look at what I have. Like, take stock of what you have. I'm content with what I have, satisfied. Yeah, I've made progress. There's more progress to be made. There are goals that we're working on. Some targets are being met, some are not, but it doesn't mean we're not going to. But everything is on the up and up, and everything I have is great just as it is, too. So when you're able to balance that thought process, your mindset is solid.
Yeah, like any story or plot line, right? You need some form of adversary to get to where we are now. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm always grateful for having these experiences in my life and these eureka
Mm-hmm.
moments
Of
that have
course.
really changed the way that I perceive things. Because
Mm-hmm.
talking about it, it sounds like, oh, it's a bad thing. But I've
Right.
always put like well, at least now I've always put like, I wouldn't change it for anything. Otherwise I wouldn't be myself.
Exactly. Okay. So, Dennis, when people come to see me for therapy, people are typically in one of three places. Some people are getting started where there's a bunch of things going on in their world, as well as there's a lot of things they're bringing forward they've never addressed before. Some people are in the middle, where they're in the middle of something, need some support navigating through some of the muck. And some people are looking back, either trying to gain closure on areas or trying to address themes and patterns to better themselves and grow so that they can move forward. So, for yourself, what part of the journey would you say that you're in based on your untold story? Would you say that you are getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I would say I'm definitely looking back.
Mm-hmm.
My mental health has, drastically improved since the whole beginning of university fiasco. I've realized where everything fits and those purposes are in terms
Mm-hmm.
of where I want to direct, my future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what do you want to remember about the process of your healing journey?
The one thing I want to point out is all the little things that you don't put your attention to. The time walking to class
Mm-hmm.
or the time you spend eating. Just those little things that give you a break and let you be present,
Mm-hmm.
which is just often overlooked because
Mm-hmm.
although sometimes we feel like we're always in a rush, we need to always
Yeah.
deal things immediately. I'm actually one of those people where, like, if I get a ping, I need to address it immediately, like no notifications for me.
Right.
Even in that time, it's important to stop and look around you and do reflection, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to do big jumps or big reflections every single moment. And it's not recommended. It's just taking those little steps.
Yeah, taking time to at least connect with yourself and be reflective. I think for sure it's a really important remembering to keep for yourself for sure. We've talked about so much of your story, all of the different themes and elements, and how you were affected, and who was involved, and how you were influenced, and what you overcame and pulled yourself through. I'm wondering if we can take a deeper look at how your untold story has affected your mental health. You mentioned moments of feeling depressed. Are you able to say a little bit more about how your mental health was affected, whether it's to understand more about what feeling depressed looked like to you, or even sharing what some of the internal dialogue looked like? What can you tell us?
So for that one, I guess it also relates to like the socializing thing as well. Like I was kind of shutting myself in, shutting myself down,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the lack of motivation and ambition to really do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it was like that journey of, overcoming what people have said or what I perceive them to be like, or even my own actions. If you don't do anything, how are you supposed to resolve it?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of I know what I have to do, but I was really unmotivated to do anything about it. Or even when people say, like, you should go and see what's out there, but I can just deal with it myself. And it was kind of that, again, that arrogance or that naivety that brought me to thinking that I can handle everything myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a really bad cycle of kind of that repeating process. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to do anything. You're just
Mm-hmm.
not, even though you
Mm-hmm.
should. And that's what really got me to, I guess, really depressing mindset.
Right. And so when you were feeling depressed, so yes, you did have that mindset and really no motivation to follow through with things that you even knew could possibly help get you out of a slump. I'm just curious, when you were feeling depressed, did you also experience or did you have any experience with any physical sensations or symptoms, or did you have a hard time getting out of bed or actually executing tasks that needed to happen? Like, were you still able to sleep? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So in terms of like the physical things, I would say like eating a lot less, but also when eating a lot,
Mm-hmm.
that was a really big thing. Another thing was procrastination. So I'm not a person that actually does anything late. I will get things done before it's due. I've never been late to hand in an assessment. But procrastination was a huge one where I would be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take the weekdays entirely off. I'm not going to do anything. So I just chill, lay in bed, kind of a deal. And then on the weekend, I would spend all those hours that I should have been doing schoolwork on the weekend. So like weekends were like, okay, I'll do my chores and I will spend like 8 hours in a row or something, like even longer doing schoolwork.
Right.
So it was like burning crash, right? Like you just
Yeah.
don't get out of bed or something or stay in bed the full day on weekdays and then just crash on the weekends by overworking yourself.
Right. So a lot of destructive patterns, and it's like one was compensating for the other.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anything else that you can tell us about how your mental health was affected during this time?
After the first year, you kind of get hit with the reality of this is what my life is like.
Mm-hmm.
In the second year, I was still living on residence by myself. And, I tried to do a better schedule because I knew it wasn't working. I tried to be more sustainable, but then all that loneliness just crept up on me one day, and I could no longer work with music. It was just like I had to work in complete silence. And then that silence crept up on me, and I couldn't work in silence anymore. Like, it was kind of driving me crazy. It's not like I was hearing voices or anything, but like it was a deafening silence.
It became too much. Now, during this period, did you ever seek out like support from like a professional? Like, did you ever go and I know that your parents had a lot of rules about like don't talk to people, don't do this, only speak when spoken to, and all of those rules. But when you were in university, did you check out like counseling on campus or speak to anyone about what you were going through on the inside?
I didn't. I didn't. When I do speak about this, people was like, "Oh, you should, you should." But I was just like, "No, I got it. Like, I'm fine."
Right, right.
But I wasn't, and I think that is also to do with the stigma
The
of
stigma, right?
I'm not willing to be open about that, to seek professional help. It's you kind of hear things too, like, does it really help? Will it really help? Because you kind of talk to people who have experienced professional help. Sometimes you hear really bad stories.
Right. Well, what I do know is that sometimes when you do open Pandora's box, or when you are cleaning out a very messy closet or junk drawer, it's a lot scarier when it all comes out. And it does require some skill in sorting to be able to organize, sift through things, clean things up, and put things back in order. And also, people who might not have found the right fit person, or it can also be that they might not have been ready to encounter what they were about to break free from. So there are a lot of things to consider, but certainly working through something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a positive experience all the time, right? But I guess if that's what you were hearing as possibilities, and you already are facing the stigma of we don't do this, obviously that would have made it a little bit more heavy weighted to want to go down that path and choose that option.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious about now is, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you really want them to know?
So I mentioned it earlier before as well, but one is be kind to yourself, take things slowly, and go at your own pace. Because again, like those little things, and by little things, I mean like, in terms of self-improvement, right? Like we're not doing little things to get better than someone else comparatively. Obviously, your self-improvement could lead to you bettering yourself compared to others, but we really should not be going in that competitive landscape. Self-improvement is number one, beat your previous self. And to do that, take the little steps in life and enjoy it. Enjoy the time that it takes to transition. Don't feel like it's impossible because you just need to take the first step. Once you take that first step, everything becomes a lot easier and more manageable. And I know it's hard getting over that first bump just because of anxiety and other things. But once you start your journey, it's okay to fail. Failure is just your first step in learning. Take it as a lesson, and then work on experimenting and improving yourself.
I love your message. Beat your previous self. I really like it. It's very catchy. That's really catchy and really important messages for people. So I'm curious if you can share, what is that game-changing inspiration that's close to you that reflects your untold story? So something that was really pivotal for you when you were going through this journey. So was there like an inspirational quote or a book or a presentation or an event, something that spoke to you?
I guess the big one is in my final year, I was taking Spanish class, And as always, my Spanish teacher is a huge inspiration. One of the presentations that I actually did was "What is happiness?" in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And what really pushed me, I think, throughout high school is I used to be a very logical person, like I'm very like math heavy sciences. But after taking English and Spanish, those courses really broadened my mind for creativity. Like I found myself enjoying that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And this Spanish teacher of mine has always been teaching life lessons, right? That you normally don't learn through a typical classroom. And I still keep in touch with him. And I think having an amazing teacher has really opened my views on life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's really important that you had that person who helped spark that for you. So tell us, what is a cause or an organization that's been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of what the Canadian Mental Health Association does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I definitely support the cause as I've done projects relating to mental health in university as well,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just something that I find very important.
Right.
Obviously, my Spanish teacher has been a big part of my life, and also just for my girlfriend who's been very supportive,
Mm-hmm.
throughout my journey.
Awesome. That's a wonderful shout out. Okay. So tell us, how can people connect with you if they would like to? Where are you findable?
Yeah, so I'm findable on LinkedIn as well as our company website for the startup, which should also have my link to my LinkedIn, expressme.ca.
So we've grabbed all that information. It should already be up on your show notes page. So people can look out for that. And they can connect with you if they would like to, which is fantastic. So, Dennis, guess what?
What?
You've just dared yourself to share. Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did it. And Dennis, I really would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the story that you've shared today. Having the courage to unpack your own personal experience of combating the pressure of growing up in a prescribed environment and breaking free and coming into your own. I'm truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing.
Thank you.
Awesome. And once again, Dennis, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.